The HR director leaned back in her chair, lips curling as if she were bored with the entire process. She tapped the papers against the desk, then finally slid them across to me. "You know how these things go, Sabina," she said, her tone dismissive, almost smug. "Redundant, effective today, no severance." She didn't bother to mask her disdain. It was as though my 12 years of work could be erased with a shrug. I met her eyes and didn't blink. I didn't beg. I didn't argue. I only smiled, steady, calm, unshaken. That smile unsettled her far more than any protest could. For the first time, she faltered, her rehearsed confidence cracking as she realized humiliation had failed to break me. The document she handed me carried a quiet betrayal of its own. The date on the header showed it had been prepared weeks earlier. They had planned this while I was still working through nights, ensuring their billion-dollar systems never collapsed. The cruelty wasn't just in the firing, it was in pretending it was sudden. I want to pause for just a second. How have you been lately? Remember to take time for yourself outside of work, even in the middle of life's demands. I'd also love to know, where are you watching from? It's always incredible to see this community come together from so many different places around the world. If this story resonates with you, tap the like button and subscribe. It means we can keep sharing these stories together. I was Sabina Cole, head of escrow and settlement design at Brixwell Capital. My role never appeared in glossy reports or press releases, but my systems held together every major transaction the firm executed. I built the framework that moved billions safely across borders, a framework that demanded precision and discipline. I traded holidays, family gatherings, even my father's final birthday for the work. Invisible sacrifices, but indispensable results. And above me towered Graham Litton, the CEO who lived for cameras and applause. He closed no deals himself, yet claimed every success. He believed appearances moved markets, while I knew it was structure and compliance that kept them from collapsing. That contrast, his vanity against my invisible labor, was the real injustice buried in this sterile room. Beside her, a young assistant shifted uncomfortably. His face reddened, lips parting as if to object. But fear anchored him. He looked down at the desk, silent. Choosing safety over solidarity, the humiliation pressed against me, sharp and deliberate, yet I breathed it in, kept my smile intact, and let the silence hang heavy. They thought they had ended me. In truth, they had only triggered something they did not understand. I walked out of that sterile HR office with a cardboard box and a forced smile. But the weight I carried wasn't in the box. It was in years of work that no one seemed to remember. My name was Sabina Cole, and for over a decade, I held the title Head of Escrow and Settlement Design at Brixwell Capital. It wasn't a glamorous job. You wouldn't see it in glossy magazines or hear it shouted from a stage. But behind every billion-dollar deal, behind every wire transfer that moved across borders, there was my framework, my system. I built the architecture that ensured billions moved cleanly, legally, securely. One missed clause, one misplaced timer, and fortunes could collapse. Yet no investor ever knew my name. No partner ever shook my hand. My work existed in silence, invisible but essential. I used to think that one day the company would recognize that invisible labor, that perhaps in a meeting, Graham Litton, the CEO with his perpetual tan and effortless charm, would turn and acknowledge the woman who made his theater possible. But recognition never came. Instead, Graham became the golden boy of every press release, hailed as the man who, personally, closed another record-breaking transaction. The bitterness burned deeper when I stumbled across an internal news bulletin a week after my firing. The article splashed Graham's photo across the top, him in his tailored suit, shaking hands, smiling for the cameras. The headline praised him as the strategic genius who had single-handedly finalized the $1.9 billion energy acquisition. My name wasn't just missing, it had been erased, replaced with a narrative that belonged entirely to him. I stared at the screen, heart pounding, mouth dry. I had written the escrow structure for that very deal. I had spent nights adjusting the settlement design so funds cleared through 3 jurisdictions without triggering a regulatory delay. Without my work, Graham wouldn't have had a stage to pose on. Yet here was the company's own communications team rewriting history, giving him the spotlight, deleting me like I'd never existed. The quiet betrayal stung sharper than the termination itself. It wasn't just about losing my job. It was about losing the story of what I had given. My invisible work had been stolen, reshaped into someone else's glory. And then came the group chat. Colleagues I'd worked beside for years debated my absence like I was a rumor, not a person. She wasn't that important, one typed. Systems keep running, another replied. But then a quieter voice appeared. You really think Graham could run a deal without her framework? Arguments broke out. Some minimized my role, saying any competent manager could have done it. Others defended me, insisting they'd seen the hours, the complexity, the sacrifices. Watching them bicker about my worth while I sat in silence was its own humiliation. I wanted to scream, I was the one who built the backbone you all depend on. But instead, I closed the chat, my hands trembling. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, feeling smaller than I had in years. Graham would go on with his photo ops, investors would clap, and the world would keep turning as though Sabina Cole had never mattered. That was the hardest part, not the firing, not the cold words, not even the lack of severance. The hardest part was knowing I had been there, had given everything, and still vanished into the background. And yet, beneath the bitterness, something faint stirred. They could erase my name from memos and chats, but they couldn't erase the system itself. It was mine. I had built it, and sooner or later, the world would remember what they tried so hard to forget. The cameras never left him. Wherever Graham Litton went, there was always a flashbulb ready, a journalist poised with a microphone, and a crowd eager to believe in his charm. He thrived on that glow, feeding on attention the way most people breathe air. For Graham, perception was reality. If the world saw him as brilliant, then brilliance must be his. If the headlines crowned him a visionary, then the work of the people behind him no longer mattered. I had spent 12 years ensuring every billion-dollar deal Brixwell touched didn't collapse under its own weight. Graham? He hadn't set foot in the compliance wing once. He didn't know the difference between a regulatory buffer and a settlement trigger. But he didn't need to. His gift wasn't in building systems. It was in hijacking the spotlight created by others. And people bought it. The board adored his polish. Investors swooned at his handshakes. And the press never asked who had done the invisible work. They didn't want to see the scaffolding that held the structure up. They wanted a showman. Graham gave them one. But when I saw the headline that week, disgust settled like lead in my chest. A glossy photo splashed across a tabloid showed Graham at an upscale Manhattan restaurant. Wine glass raised, smile bright, sitting across from none other than Arden Doyle, CEO of our fiercest rival. The timing was grotesque. He had cut me loose that very morning, dismissed me without severance, acted as though my years of sacrifice meant nothing. And then, hours later, he celebrated with the enemy, as if I'd been just another piece swept off his chessboard. The caption was worse than the picture. Litton seen dining with Doyle. Friendly competition or quiet merger in the works? My jaw clenched so tightly it ached. To the outside world, it looked like a clever move. 2 titans of finance sharing a bottle of Bordeaux? To me, it was humiliation layered on humiliation. He hadn't only erased me from the company, he'd made my dismissal into the backdrop for his next public stunt. I said nothing. I didn't rant online. Didn't text old colleagues to fume, but inside, quiet anger burned. It wasn't just betrayal anymore, it was mockery. Graham was laughing on the front page while I packed my life into a box. The fallout inside Brixwell was immediate. The PR department scrambled, fielding calls from journalists who wanted to know if Brixwell and Doyle's firm were striking a secret partnership. No, no. The spokesperson stammered on Bloomberg TV. It was a private dinner, nothing more. Behind closed doors. I knew they were panicking. If investors believed Graham was cozying up to a rival, confidence in Brixwell's stability would plummet. I could almost hear the late-night conference calls, PR begging Graham to tone it down, compliance reminding him of disclosure rules, marketing searching for a distraction to throw at the press. But Graham never cared about fallout. To him, bad press was still press, and attention of any kind kept his empire alive. I sat in my small apartment, the tabloid spread open on the table, bile rising in my throat. The man who had stolen my work, my recognition, my years. He was clinking glasses with a rival like nothing had happened. My invisibility gave him freedom. My silence gave him room. And for the first time, I realized just how deeply he underestimated me. Disgust twisted into something colder, sharper. He thought I was finished. He thought I was incapable of striking back, incapable of stepping out from the shadows he had forced me into. He was wrong. For now. I kept that knowledge buried. Quiet, simmering just beneath the surface. Anger doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits. Patient, deliberate, invisible, until the moment it burns everything down. The photo of Graham clinking glasses with our rival still burned in my mind. But by the next morning, my thoughts had shifted. Disgust could only carry me so far. What I needed now was clarity. And clarity. I had. Because while Graham preened for cameras and the PR department spun lies, I alone remembered the system's rules. The escrow framework I had built was not merely a technical design. It was a living safeguard. Without my signature, the original escrow officer of record, no settlement above $3 billion could close. If that authorization was missing for 18 calendar days, the funds would not linger. They would automatically return to the investors. I didn't need to lift a finger. I didn't need to hack a server or leak a file. All I had to do was remain silent, and the countdown would run on its own. That knowledge was power. Cold, quiet power. On the 6th day, I received proof of their desperation. An internal email, addressed to Executive Settlement Review, found its way into my personal inbox by mistake. I read the subject line twice, almost laughing at the irony. Authorization missing, settlement file pending. They had no idea I still existed in the system's blind spots, able to see their panic play out. I pictured the meeting that must have followed, the CFO sweating under the fluorescent lights, legal counsel rifling through contracts, trying to find a loophole. I could almost hear them arguing, can we designate a proxy signature? No, the investors would never accept it. What if we backdate an addendum? Too risky. If it leaks, we're finished. The CFO, cautious to a fault, would have raised the alarm. He'd be terrified that if investors discovered the gap, faith in Brixwell would erode overnight, but Graham would dismiss him, the same way he had dismissed me. Graham believed appearances outweighed substance. He thought a confident press release could smother any technicality. He didn't understand that this wasn't a detail, it was the backbone. I leaned back in my chair and let the cold certainty settle over me. For once, I wasn't scrambling, staying up past midnight to cover someone else's recklessness. I was in control, not through action, but through inaction. The machine I had built was impartial. It didn't care about PR strategies or board politics. It only cared about the rules coded into its core. 18 days. That was all. I thought about the years I had bent myself to meet their demands, about the sacrifices that no one had ever seen. And now, Finally, the balance was shifting. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to seek revenge in the traditional sense. All I needed to do was wait, calm and still, while the system carried out the justice they had invited on themselves. The email sat in my inbox like a quiet reminder. Authorization missing. Missing because they had made me expendable. Missing because they had believed their theater was more important than my framework. For the first time since that humiliating meeting in HR, I felt no bitterness, no despair, just a controlled, icy calm. They were already unraveling, and they didn't even know it. I closed the laptop gently, as though sealing the knowledge inside. Outside, the city kept moving, horns blaring, footsteps rushing, lives unfolding. Inside, a countdown ticked, steady and unstoppable. 17 days remained. Before we move on, I'd love to hear from you. What part of this story has struck you the most so far? How would you want the ending to play out? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I truly enjoy reading them. And stay with me until the end, because something unexpected is about to surface. And I promise, you won't want to miss it. The box sat in the corner of my apartment like an uninvited guest. I hadn't touched it since carrying it out of Brixwell, for days. I avoided even looking in its direction, as if leaving it sealed might keep the humiliation at bay. But on the 5th evening, I gave in. I pulled it onto the coffee table and began sifting through the remnants of my 12 years. A stapler, a mug with a fading company logo, a few pens, their ink nearly gone. Then an envelope I hadn't noticed before. I slid a finger under the flap, half expecting a farewell card from a colleague. My chest tightened with something close to hope. The card inside was bright, cheerful, oversized letters printed across the front. "Congratulations on your first day." For a moment, I just stared. Then a hollow laugh slipped out. HR hadn't even sent me the right card. Instead of words of thanks or acknowledgement, I'd been handed a recycled gesture meant for some new hire. My end had been reduced to someone else's beginning. My years of sacrifice dismissed with a clerical error. I set the card aside, but the sting lingered. It wasn't simply carelessness, it was confirmation of my invisibility. At Brixwell, I had been machinery, not a person. They didn't see me leave. They didn't even know how to say goodbye. My phone buzzed. A message lit up the screen from Ellen, one of the few colleagues I had once trusted. "I want to help you, Sabina. I really do. But I can't. I have 2 kids, and I can't risk this job." I read it twice, my throat tight. I didn't blame her. I understood. Survival demanded silence in that office. Speaking up would have made her the next casualty. Still, the admission carved something out of me. Even loyalty had limits. Even friendship bowed before fear. I typed back, "I understand. Take care of your family." And I meant it. But the ache spread anyway. After that, more messages trickled in. Some colleagues sent short notes, safe. Empty words like "sorry to hear" or "good luck." Others said nothing at all. I pictured them whispering in break rooms, debating whether I had deserved it, whether I had been that important. None of them knocked on my door. None of them offered to stand beside me. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. Outside, New York pulsed with its usual chaos. Sirens, honking cars, laughter echoing from a bar down the street. Inside, I sat surrounded by relics of a career that seemed to have evaporated overnight. I had been erased so completely that even my exit carried no weight. Isolation is a peculiar kind of wound. It doesn't bleed, it doesn't bruise, it just grows heavier. A pressure pressing in from all sides. I had given Brixwell everything, my nights, my weekends, even my father's last birthday. And in return, I was alone with a box and a misprinted card. For a moment, the bitterness threatened to overwhelm me. But then I remembered the countdown. 17 days left. The system was still ticking. My silence wasn't just emptiness. It was a weapon they had handed me themselves. Lonely as I felt, I clung to that cold comfort. They might ignore me, erase me, reduce me to an error in HR's files, but the machine I had built had not forgotten. And in time, neither would they. The silence of my apartment had almost become familiar when my phone lit up with an unknown number. I hesitated, thumb hovering, my pulse quickening. Most of the calls I'd ignored since leaving Brixwell were reporters fishing for a comment, or colleagues too afraid to say much at all. But something about the international code at the front of this number made me pause. I answered. "Ms. Cole?" a calm voice said, low and measured. "I represent one of the investment groups backing the current transaction at Brixwell. I think you know the one." My throat tightened. Of course I knew. The $3.3 billion deal was the only thing anyone at Brixwell cared about. The same deal hanging on the rules I had written. "I don't know if I should be speaking to you," I said carefully. "You don't have to," the caller replied smoothly. "Just listen." The silence stretched. Heavy. I could hear faint background noise, papers shuffling, the muted buzz of an office half a world away. Then the voice continued. "We are aware of a missing authorization. What we want to know is simple. Does your signature still matter?" My heart skipped. They knew, or at least they suspected. The rules of the escrow weren't public, but savvy investors could smell weakness from oceans away. "I'm no longer with the company," I said. "They made that very clear." "Yes," the voice said with a hint of amusement. "So we've heard. And yet, sometimes absence is power. Tell me, without you, can the transaction still clear?" The question hit me square in the chest. I wanted to say yes, to shrug it off, to deny my role. But I couldn't. The truth sat between us, unsaid. My silence became its own answer. The caller chuckled softly. "As we thought. Then let me be direct. If Brixwell collapses this deal, there will be consequences. For them, for Graham. But opportunities also open, Ms. Cole. Should they fail, our group would be very interested in retaining you as an independent advisor. Imagine, no longer invisible. Imagine your expertise recognized, compensated, valued." For a second, I couldn't breathe. The idea of stepping back into the arena, not as their discarded pawn, but as someone with leverage, sent a rush of adrenaline through me. But then doubt swept in. Speaking to this caller, admitting too much, could make me the villain. Graham would call it sabotage. The board could try to smear me. The press would eat it alive. And yet, the alternative was silence. Letting the system I had built tick away on its own. 18 days. Less now. Did I need to act at all? Or was the stronger move to do nothing? To let Brixwell destroy itself without a word from me? I thought of Ellen's text, of my father's advice about legacy. I thought of the box on my table. The wrong card congratulating me on a first day I would never have. "Ms. Cole?" the voice prompted gently. I swallowed hard. My pulse thundered in my ears. "I can't confirm anything," I said finally. "And I won't deny it either." A pause. Then the caller's tone sharpened. "That's enough for now. We'll be in touch." The line went dead, leaving me in the quiet hum of my apartment. My hands trembled as I set the phone down. Every cell in my body buzzed with suspense, the weight of what had just unfolded pressing down on me. For the first time since HR had slid that letter across the desk, I felt the balance shift. The world outside Brixwell saw what Graham refused to. My silence was not weakness. It was leverage. But whether to wield it or let the machine work alone, that choice still hovered, unresolved, like a blade hanging in the air. By the 10th day, the whispers inside Brixwell had become shouts behind closed doors. Investors were circling with sharper questions. The legal team was sending frantic memos. and even the junior analysts could sense something was wrong. The countdown wasn't just in my head anymore, it was alive in theirs, gnawing at the edges of their confidence. In a tense boardroom meeting, the CFO finally said aloud what everyone else had been avoiding. "The 18th day is coming," he warned, his voice tight, eyes scanning the room. "If the authorization is not in place by then, the escrow will fail. Funds will revert. We cannot pretend this isn't real." Across the table, Graham Litton leaned back in his chair with that same careless smile he wore in every photograph. "Don't be dramatic," he said smoothly. "We've handled bigger hurdles before. The investors want this deal too badly to let it fall apart. They'll forgive a technicality." The CFO's face flushed. "This isn't a technicality, Graham. It's written into the structure. The rules are locked. We can't just charm our way through it." But Graham waved a hand, as if brushing away a gnat. "The market believes in me. The press believes in me. That's all that matters. If we look calm, they'll stay calm. End of discussion." The panic didn't subside. If anything, his dismissal made it worse. And then came the leak. 2 days later, an internal recording surfaced in the inboxes of several managers. No one admitted to sending it, but everyone heard it. Graham's voice, sharp with arrogance, cut through the static. "Stop worrying about deadlines. She's gone. And we'll sign whatever we need to sign. Investors don't care about signatures. They care about results." The recording spread like wildfire. By lunch, nearly every department had heard it. By evening, it reached the investors Graham had been so sure of. What he thought was confidence now sounded like negligence. What he thought was reassurance now sounded like recklessness. Inside the board, panic erupted into open conflict. Half the directors argued to come clean with the investors, to admit the missing authorization and try to negotiate terms. The other half demanded silence, fearing exposure would tank the stock before the 18th day even arrived. "We can't keep lying," one director shouted in a meeting. "If the deal collapses in public, it will be 10 times worse. And if we admit it now," another shot back, "the collapse is immediate. We buy ourselves nothing but humiliation." They went in circles, their voices rising, their polished facades cracking under the weight of the countdown. Meanwhile, Graham sat at the head of the table, his jaw tight, his smile gone. He refused to yield, clinging to his belief that appearances alone could keep the ship afloat. I didn't need a front row seat to see the chaos. I could feel it in the calls I wasn't taking, in the silence that grew heavier each day. Ellen messaged me once, late at night. "It's bad. Sabina, they're fighting each other. Nobody knows what to do." I stared at her words for a long time. Part of me ached for the colleagues still trapped inside that crumbling tower. But another part of me, colder, steadier, knew this was exactly what Graham deserved. The panic was of his own making. He had ignored the warnings, silenced the truth, and bet everything on his charm. Now the mask was slipping, and everyone was seeing what lay beneath. The 18th day was still ahead, but the cracks had already spread too far. Brixwell wasn't just running out of time. They were running out of faith. And in the world of billion-dollar deals, faith was the only currency that truly mattered. The 11th day dawned with a strange calm inside Brixwell, after weeks of nervous whispers and frantic memos. Graham walked into the boardroom, projecting unshakable confidence. He carried a folder under his arm like a magician about to reveal a trick. For the first time in days, some directors dared to breathe easier. "I told you we'd handle it," he said smoothly, sliding the folder across the table. "Our legal team has drawn up an addendum, a replacement signatory. This," he tapped the paper with manicured fingers, "is our solution." The directors leaned forward, the CFO's brows furrowed as he scanned the page. "This names one of our junior legal officers as the new escrow authority?" "Precisely," Graham said, his smile broadening. It's a formality. We backdate the document, add the required seals, and the investors never need to know the difference. Problem solved. For a moment, relief rippled through the room. The directors exchanged glances. Perhaps Graham had pulled off another miracle. After all, he had built his career on sleight of hand, convincing people that confidence was as good as compliance. But not everyone bought the performance. One of the senior legal advisors, a man who had tolerated Graham's shortcuts for years, slammed the folder shut. His voice shook with fury. "You're not solving the problem. You're lying. To us. To them. To everyone. And if this gets out, it's fraud. Plain and simple." Graham's smile tightened, but he didn't flinch. Fraud is such a heavy word. Think of it as creative continuity. Investors don't want excuses. They want results. They'll never question it. The argument raged for hours, with the board split between those desperate for any fix and those horrified by the risk. But Graham pushed forward, charming, cajoling, wearing down their resistance. In the end, he got his way. The addendum was signed. A courier rushed the packet to Dubai. For 2 days, Brixwell dared to hope. Graham strutted around the office again, boasting to reporters that the deal was firmly on track. Directors began to unclench their jaws. Even the CFO allowed himself a cautious sigh of relief. But in my apartment, I watched the news feeds with a wry smile. I knew better. You couldn't trick the architecture I had designed, and neither could the partners on the other side. The confirmation came in the form of a curt statement from the Dubai consortium. It hit the wires like a hammer. "We do not accept substitute signatures. Only the original escrow officer of record will be recognized. Any attempt to alter this requirement is a breach of trust." The hope that had swelled inside Brixwell popped like a soap bubble. The directors who had clung to Graham's bravado were left pale and shaking. The CFO buried his head in his hands, and that senior legal advisor, the one who had tried to stop him, erupted. "Do you see? Do you finally see? You didn't just lie to them. You lied to us. You've dragged us all into your circus." Even Graham's grin faltered. For once. His polished mask slipped, revealing the desperation underneath. He muttered something about miscommunication, but no one was convinced. The damage was done. From my couch, I whispered the words they all should have known. There are no shortcuts. What had begun as a flicker of hope inside those boardroom walls ended in bitter irony. The trick, the addendum, the swagger, it all collapsed under the weight of reality. They wanted to believe Graham could bend the rules. But the truth was simpler. The rules were already bending them. By the 15th day, the cracks in Brixwell's facade were wide enough for the public to see. And yet Graham Litton appeared on the morning financial program, smiling into the cameras as if nothing had changed. "The deal is firmly on track," he declared. "Everything is under control." I watched the broadcast from a corner cafe, steam curling off my cup. The words scrolled across the ticker. Litton confident in 3.3B transaction. His voice was smooth, his hands steady on the table, the performance flawless. But behind the calm, I could sense the panic. He was bluffing, just as he had always done. I let out a breath that was half a laugh, half a sigh. My reflection in the window caught the faint curve of my lips, a smile that was anything but amused. He could lie to the cameras, but he couldn't lie to the countdown. My phone vibrated on the table, an unknown number. I almost ignored it, assuming another reporter fishing for a quote, but something told me to answer. "Sabina!" The voice was unmistakable, Graham himself. My grip on the phone tightened. For 12 years. He had never once said my name outside of a meeting. Now he was calling me directly. "We don't have to make this messy," he said. "You know what we need, so let's stop pretending. Name your price. How much for your signature?" For a moment, the cafe noise blurred into a distant hum. My chest constricted. There it was. His admission. The power he had denied me for years now lay at my feet, acknowledged in the most direct way possible. But tension coiled around me like a vice. If I answered wrong, if I let even a trace of emotion slip, everything could unravel. I forced my voice to stay calm. "I'm not negotiating. Graham." His tone sharpened. "Don't be foolish. This deal matters more than you do. Take the money, and no one ever has to know." I ended the call without another word. My hand trembled as I set the phone down, not with fear, but with the sheer weight of the moment. Almost immediately, a message flashed across my screen. "Ellen, he called you, didn't he?" I stared at the words, stunned. "Yes," I typed back. Her reply came within seconds. "Don't soften. Don't let him pull you back in. They'll use you, then discard you again. Please, Sabina, don't give them what they want." My throat tightened. Ellen's words cut deep. Not because I doubted them, but because part of me still craved recognition. The acknowledgement I had been denied for so long. For 12 years. I had sacrificed everything to prove my worth. And here he was, finally admitting it. And yet the offer wasn't respect. It was a bribe wrapped in desperation. I closed my eyes, breathing slowly. Around me, the cafe carried on as though nothing extraordinary had happened. People laughed, cups clinked, life moved forward. Only I sat there, caught in the gravity of a choice that could alter the future of an empire. The tension was unbearable, not the pressure to act, but the pressure to stay still. Because in this case, silence was stronger than any deal I could sign. I typed back to Ellen. "I won't." Her response was instant. "Good. Then let the clock do the work." I looked down at the dregs of my coffee, my hands finally steady. Graham could call again. He could send his lawyers. He could shout to the press that everything was fine. But the truth was already decided. The countdown was still ticking, and no price could buy back the time they had lost. Midnight came like a drumbeat. I lay awake on my couch, the city outside muffled and gray, waiting for the hour I had counted toward in silence. The 18th day, the final tick of the system I had built, the one they had dismissed along with me. I glanced at the clock on my phone. 12 o'clock midnight. My breath slowed. My palms pressed flat against my knees. And then, with clinical precision, it happened. 1 minute past midnight, and the escrow executed its rule. The funds, $3.3 billion, returned to the investors with a quiet digital sweep. No alarms, no fireworks, just a clean reversal that shook the financial world awake. Within minutes, my phone lit up with notifications. News alerts buzzed across the screen. 3.3B Brixwell deal collapses overnight. Settlement funds reverted. Confidence in Lytton rocked. The sensation was strange, like a dam breaking inside me. 12 years of humiliation, erasure, invisibility, all distilled into this moment. I hadn't raised my voice, hadn't stormed their offices, hadn't begged for recognition. I had simply let the system speak. And now its verdict was final. By dawn. The story was everywhere. On CNBC, a chart glowed red across the studio screens as anchors scrambled to explain what had happened. The line representing Brixwell's stock price plunged so violently that one host blurted, "This is a free fall, live on air." I sipped my coffee, watching their panic broadcast to the world. For once, my work wasn't invisible. The collapse itself was proof. The rules I had written, the structure I had protected, had outlasted Graham's arrogance. The twist of irony wasn't lost on me. Graham had always said perception mattered more than precision, and now perception was his undoing. Investors didn't just see a deal fail, they saw a leader who had lied, who had cut corners, who had ignored the warnings of those who built the foundation he stood on. Meanwhile, employees still trapped inside the company began to break their silence. On social media, Anonymous posts flooded the feeds. We were led into disaster. They ignored every warning. This is on Graham, not us. One message struck me hardest. We all knew Sabina's system was critical. They fired her anyway. Now we pay the price. I stared at those words, the weight of them pressing against the years I had spent feeling invisible. Someone had said it out loud. The truth was finding daylight. In the offices I had once walked, chaos reigned. I imagined employees watching the numbers tumble, their faces pale, their voices rising, directors pointing fingers, lawyers scrambling for explanations, PR spinning frantic statements. The building that had swallowed me whole was now choking on its own silence. And yet, inside my apartment, there was only calm. My heartbeat was steady, my breathing slow. The vindication was not loud, not triumphant in the way I once imagined it might be. It was quieter, deeper, like finally being able to set down a weight I had carried too long. I thought of my father again, of his words about legacy. For years I feared my legacy had been stolen, erased by someone else's spotlight. But now, I understood. Legacy is not applause. It is what remains when the noise fades. And what remained was the system I had built. A system that had remembered me when people chose to forget. The markets would keep tumbling. The headlines would keep screaming. Graham would keep scrambling. That was their chaos to endure. My chapter of the story was different. It ended here, at 1 minute past midnight, with quiet release and undeniable truth. I looked out the window at the first gray stretch of morning light. For the first time in 12 years. I felt free. The morning after the collapse, Brixwell scrambled to project control. They called a press conference at headquarters, inviting financial media from across the country. The board hoped a carefully worded statement might calm the storm. But no carefully scripted words could undo what the world had seen at 1 minute past midnight, $3.3 billion vanishing in a single sweep. I watched the feed on my laptop, the volume low, a second cup of coffee warm in my hand. The room on screen was a chaos of flashing cameras and sharp voices. Reporters jostled for position, microphones raised like weapons. Graham Litton stood at the podium, his tie knotted too tightly, his smile brittle. He began with platitudes, phrases about temporary turbulence and strategic adjustments. His voice strained to sound calm. But the journalists weren't buying it. They cut through his script with questions that landed like arrows. Mr. Litton, is it true the deal collapsed because of a missing authorization? Why wasn't this risk disclosed to shareholders? Did your legal team knowingly attempt to alter the contract terms? Graham's jaw tightened, his hands gripping the podium as though it might steady him. He dodged. He deflected. He offered rehearsed lines about ongoing reviews. But then came the question that cracked the facade completely. Is it true, a female reporter shouted above the noise, that you fired the architect of the escrow system only 18 days before the deadline? Is it true you dismissed Sabina Cole? The room fell into a hush sharp enough to cut glass. Graham froze, his smile gone. For a heartbeat. I thought he might lie again, try to weave another story. But the pressure was too strong. The eyes of the press, the board members in the front row, the shareholders watching on live television. They demanded the truth. Yes, Graham said at last, his voice tight, almost choking. We fired Sabina Cole. The words struck the room like thunder. The reporters erupted, their questions tripping over one another. Why? Was she scapegoated? Was this a personal decision? The board members exchanged furious looks, their whispered arguments suddenly audible in the hot microphones at the front of the room. In my apartment, I leaned back in my chair and let a smile curl slowly across my lips. For years, he had erased me from headlines, stolen credit for my work, treated me as invisible, and now, in front of the world. He had spoken my name, not to praise me, but to confess his own downfall. It was an admission he never intended to make, dragged from him by truth too heavy to bury. The satisfaction that spread through me was not pure, not sweet. It was darker than that. It was the satisfaction of watching arrogance corrode itself, of seeing the man who had dismissed me reduced to a symbol of failure. The board's internal fractures spilled out in real time. Several directors rose from their seats, faces red with fury. One shouted into a microphone that Graham had misled the company and its investors. Another called his behavior reckless, unethical, and untenable. The divide was sharp. Some demanded damage control, others demanded blood. "Step down, Graham!" one board member yelled audibly, his voice carrying over the crowd. "For the sake of Brixwell, step down now." The cameras caught every second. The footage streamed across networks, hashtags igniting on social media. Brixwell collapse. Graham's composure cracked. He tugged at his collar, sweat shining under the lights. He tried to argue, tried to insist he was still the best man to lead. But his words drowned beneath the uproar. The once polished CEO looked like a cornered animal, snarling while the world closed in. I should have felt pity. Once, years ago, I might have, but not anymore. This was the man who had humiliated me, who had stripped me of recognition, who believed he could rewrite the rules to suit his pride. Now he was caught in the rules he mocked, strangled by the system he thought beneath him. And I, silent, patient, forgotten, had become the shadow he could not shake. I closed the laptop gently, savoring the moment like a glass of bitter wine. This wasn't triumph in the conventional sense. There was no applause, no medal, no handshake of thanks. It was something deeper, darker, the vindication of truth, the satisfaction of watching power eat itself alive. Graham had spoken my name to the world. He had confessed, and in doing so, he had ensured that the story of Brixwell's collapse would never be told without mine. The noise surrounding Brixwell didn't fade quickly. For days, their collapse remained front-page news, dissected on every business channel. Reporters replayed the press conference where Graham admitted my name. Analysts traced the stock's downward spiral, and employees spilled stories that confirmed everything the world already suspected. But inside my apartment, a rare calm settled. The storm outside wasn't mine to fight anymore. One evening, Ellen came by, her face drawn with exhaustion. She set a bag of takeout on my counter and sat opposite me at the kitchen table. For a long while, she didn't speak. Finally, she looked up, her eyes heavy with a mixture of relief and fear. "Tell me the truth, Sabina," she whispered. "Was it you? Did you bring them down?" I met her gaze, steady and calm. "No, Ellen," I said softly. "I didn't break them. The system did exactly what it was built to do. They broke themselves when they ignored the rules." She nodded slowly, her shoulders easing, but I could tell she still carried the weight of the office, the endless guilt of being part of a machine that had chewed me up and nearly done the same to her. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "It's over," I added. "You don't have to carry it anymore." That night, after she left, I sat alone at my desk and opened my laptop. Among the stream of headlines and investor statements was one email marked with a gold seal. I clicked it open, and for a moment, I simply stared. It was from the Dubai Consortium, the same investors Graham had tried and failed to deceive. The message was formal but unmistakably clear. "We would like to formally invite you to serve as lead independent advisor on our upcoming transactions. Your expertise and integrity are evident. We believe your guidance will ensure the stability Brixwell could not." I leaned back in my chair, a slow breath escaping my chest. This wasn't a bribe. not a desperate plea for a signature. It was an acknowledgement, a recognition I had been denied for 12 years. They weren't offering me a seat at someone else's table. They were offering me my own. My eyes drifted to the framed photograph on the bookshelf. My father, standing on our porch, holding a cake with too many candles to count. I had missed that birthday, and so many others. Promotions, contracts, long nights at the office. I had always told myself it was worth it, that one day the sacrifice would mean something. And yet, in the end, I realized what my father had always known. Legacy wasn't about applause. It wasn't about being the name on the headline. Legacy was about standing for something that lasted, something true. The system I built had done that. And now, I had a chance to step into the future without losing myself to it. I closed the laptop and sat quietly for a while, letting the warmth spread through me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I owed anyone anything, not Graham, not the board, not even the investors. I was free to choose, free to say yes or no, free to build something new on my own terms. The next morning, I drafted a reply to Dubai's offer. My fingers hovered above the keyboard for a long time before I typed, "I accept, but with one condition. I will work as an independent advisor, not as a replacement cog. My role must protect the people who build systems, not exploit them." When I pressed send, a quiet satisfaction filled me, not the sharp triumph of revenge, but the deeper warmth of knowing I hadn't repeated old mistakes. This victory wasn't just mine. It was for every unseen worker who had been overlooked, discarded, erased. Later that day, I carried the box from Brixwell, the stapler, the pens, the wrong card from HR, downstairs to the recycling bin. I kept only one thing, the photo of my father. Because some things weren't reminders of loss, but of the reasons to choose differently. Standing in the morning light, I felt a strange lightness. I wasn't the same woman who had walked into HR 18 days earlier and smiled at their cruelty. I was something more, whole, vindicated, free. Life doesn't always give us loud victories. Sometimes, the sweetest triumph is the quiet kind. The moment you realize you no longer need their approval, because you've reclaimed your dignity on your own terms. And now, I'd love to hear from you. Which moment in this journey struck you the most? Was it the countdown, the press conference, or the quiet acceptance at the end? Share your thoughts in the comments. I always read them. If this story resonated with you, tap the like button, share it with someone who needs it. And don't forget to subscribe for more. There's always another story waiting to remind us that even in silence, justice has a voice.